All right. Hello and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Vanessa Chase Lockshin. I'm with the storytellingnonprofit.com. I'm here today with Noah Barnett from CauseVox. Welcome, Noah. Great to have you here for this episode of Summer Fundraising. We just have a couple of quick housekeeping things to let everyone know about. I just posted a message in the chat box, so hopefully folks are seeing that. Sometimes with Crowdcast, you need to refresh your browser if you've already been in here to get the audio and video starting. Of course, if I'm saying that, you're probably not hearing it. So hopefully you see the message in the chat box. We also know there's a bunch of you joining us over on Facebook Live as well, which is fantastic. So hello to all of you there. We're only going to be responding and looking at questions in the chat box over here on Crowdcast. So if you'd like to participate in the discussion and ask questions, we'd love for you to come over here and join us. You can go to crowdcast.io/Vanessa E. Chase, and you'll see a listing for this event there. And you can just register immediately and hop on in the webinar room with us. So you're here today for Summer Fundraising, which is our weekly live broadcast where we talk about fundraising, inspiration, and innovation. And we've been doing this all summer long. We've got a couple more episodes left. And since we're heading towards the end of August and towards the fall and winter fundraising seasons, we decided we'd start to look at year-end fundraising topics. And I know a lot of you are here today, of course, because we're going to talk about year-end fundraising and using storytelling to sort of maximize giving in that. And I'd love to introduce this week's guest and kind of get into our discussion and, of course, answer lots of questions from all of you, which I'm really excited to do. So this week we have Noah Barnett from CauseVox. He's the growth marketing lead there. Prior to CauseVox, Noah spent about 6.5 years fundraising and marketing in leadership roles at World Help and the Adventure Project. He knows firsthand some of the challenges that nonprofits face and is really passionate about equipping them with the resources and insights they really need to rally people around their cause. So welcome, Noah.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Vanessa. I know it's been great to be able to connect with you in a lot of different ways. So I'm thankful that you invited us on to the summer fundraising.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you and the team at CauseVox are really passionate about storytelling. And, lots of people have been talking about storytelling as a fundraising tool for the last few years. And I'd really love to know, why are you and the CauseVox team so passionate about storytelling as a tool for nonprofits?
Yeah, story is a big part of even why CauseVox started. So our founders, Rob and Jeff, about 7 years ago almost, were really passionate about a story that inspired them to get involved with a nonprofit. Yeah. And through that it inspired them in a way that then activated them to want to do something. And when they were activated to do something, the nonprofit provided them with, a toolkit to basically help them do that, to tell their story of why they were excited. And it wasn't sufficient for the digital age. And so they developed their own tools, which is where CauseVox actually came from, which is basically online fundraising tools to help you really, inspire your community, activate them, and rally them together. And so it's all about story. And so story is the common thread that kind of runs through all of those elements. And so it's something that's so essential to why we do what we do, but also what we're trying to help nonprofits do as well, and fundraisers that many of you are probably even listening today. So
yeah, I love that. I love when there's an excellent founding story behind companies. And I think a lot of I've been doing storytelling work and narrative communications with nonprofits for, 5 years now. I've been running this storytelling nonprofit. And I think my own interest, probably similar to yours, really grew out of my own fundraising experiences in the nonprofit sector, where I was really trying to think creatively about how to better engage donors. And in testing and sort of experiments that I was running at the time, consistently the thing that was working best to connect people was narrative communications, connecting with one idea or one project, one story about a person. And it was incredible to me just to see the power of that connection and sort of the relationship building possibilities within story. And it's been really exciting to see so many nonprofits really taking that and doing some really incredible things with it.
Absolutely. And we really believe that stories is what connects us. It's connected us throughout the ages. And so it makes sense that I'd be involved in are important to fundraising.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people also talk about storytelling in terms of movement building too, right? Which I think is kind of a more popular topic among advocacy nonprofits these days. But, I think even a, more traditional 501c3, you're also kind of in a sense building a movement. You have a mission, you have a purpose and a vision for something that you're doing in the world. And, being able to kind of rally people around a common narrative and common set of values through stories can really be such a powerful tool for that.
Yeah, and it's really fundamental of like why nonprofits exist. It's that, hey, there's a need in the world. There's a story that told them about that need, and they're rallying people, or really inspiring people to get involved to then do something about that. And so story is just runs deep in all of that. And so I think that's why it's an effective fundraising tool.
For sure. So I know before you and I came on live here, we were talking about the fact that year-end giving is coming up, although it doesn't seem quite that soon, but it's, in the not so distant future.
Yeah.
It seems
summer's over and it's time to get planning.
It seems a little crazy to be talking about it in August, but I'm glad we are, and I'm glad a lot of you are here and interested in that topic as well. So I wanted to ask you, as we're looking towards year-end giving and year-end fundraising campaigns, what role can storytelling play in some of those?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I think, again, it goes back to some of the key things that we said. If storytelling really is the foundation behind fundraising, because there's a need, even a case of support or movement building, there's something that's inspiring the requirement for that to even exist. And that's really what, we see as story. And so if you don't have stories as part of your year-end fundraising, why would people give to you? What's the motivation? What's the reason? There's no meat to your campaign. And so we don't even feel like story is optional in year-end fundraising or fundraising at all. It's really essential to have an effective and successful fundraising campaign, because it's really what is the foundation for fundraising, in our opinion, here at CauseVox.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you on that. I think, and I was recently kind of going through some examples of things I saw last year for a blog post that I'm working on around writing theory of change stories, and, the foundational piece for a lot of nonprofit campaigns. And it was really interesting to me to look at some examples side by side to think about, what is the difference between an email appeal where there's a really strong theory of change that's sort of this undercurrent story to it, versus one where there's kind of a call to action and there isn't really a theory of change. It's just donate now so we can do this thing. But it doesn't really tell you why it's important or what change that's going to make, or, why donating is the best solution to that problem. And I think you're right. Without answering some of those questions, I think we leave donors in the lurch, kind of wondering and thinking about, is this really compelling, or is this something I actually want to donate to?
Yeah, and you're not delivering any value back to the customer. So I know we think about fundraising as, we're all, giving out of our hearts to, support whatever cause it is. But at the end of the day, it's still some sort of transaction. And I think what stories allow you to do when you deliver that in your fundraising appeals, whether it's through email, whether it's through direct mail, whether you're sharing visual stories on social or video storytelling, which is huge and very important, especially as consumer behaviors start preferring videos, is that you're helping them see the return on their investment in the transaction process. So when we all buy candy and we eat candy, we feel like that rush of excitement, the dopamine makes us feel something. And in fundraising, and you're not getting anything in return, but you are. And I think that story is actually delivering on it's almost the thing you're exchanging for the donation. And you're giving it to them, not just for their own benefit, but also for them, you're equipping them with a story that they can then go out and share with their friends and families. And so we always talk about, it's not just about telling stories, but it's telling stories that are designed to be shared. And so that means keeping it simple, making sure that you're not overcomplicating your story in a way that's not understandable or relatable. And so I always say, if it's not something you would share with your friends and family on Friday night at the bar or with your family at the dinner table, like the story isn't refined enough. And so I think that's where, so stories are essential, but not just any story, like a simplified story that's designed to be shared.
I like that as a litmus test. I think a lot of people that I work with in the classes that I teach and workshops that I host, there's often this question of, am I telling the right story, or have I kind of gotten the angle right to it? And I think that's such a great suggestion. Is this a story I would actually share with people around the dinner table on Friday? Being a way that you can kind of like check that, for example.
Yeah, and we just see that's like a huge shift in consumer behaviors. So if you look at the fundamentals of the sharing economy, the fundamentals of even just recommendations and reviews on Amazon, and how people, when you buy something, want to hear what other people are saying about it. And so brands can actually inject and say, hey, here's the value proposition we're promising, so that then they can repeat that out. I feel like in nonprofit fundraising, the story is the value proposition you're giving them to then share on to others. And that helps build momentum within inside your movement, or just helps you raise more money and activate more people behind your cause.
That's such a great point. I want to go back to something you said a minute ago. We were talking about, showing donors what's possible through the story and helping them see the value of sort of the transaction, or, what they're going to do when they make a gift. In that story. And it reminded me of, a lot of the research that Penelope Burke has done over the years around donor-centered fundraising. And, consistently in a lot of her surveys and the work she's done with donors in North America, the things that people always come back and say that they want is they want to understand how the gift was used and what impact it had.
Absolutely.
And which are two such simple things, right? And stories are sort of primed to be great content to demonstrate that, before or after giving. And being able to incorporate that ahead of time, I think, can just continue to build that level of trust with donors and, a level of transparency that makes them feel good about what they're going to do.
Absolutely. And I think it's a perfect example, because when someone gives you money, the outcomes of what that specific dollars is going to do has a long life cycle. And so if you can deliver something that's representative or symbolic of the impact and outcomes that donation is then going to translate to, even if it's still representative, you're providing them something to remember why they donated, so that when there's an opportunity for them to give again, they have an anchor for them to go back with. And I worked in, I ran a child sponsorship program. It's basically where you can, give $30 a month to help support a child. The whole model of child sponsorship was actually designed as a fundraising tactic, not a programmatic function. And it was really strictly just to provide a visual representation and outcome of someone's giving that's going to remind them why they're giving $30 a month or $45 a month or whatever. And so it's delivering exactly on what Penelope is talking about.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think a lot of organizations see calls to action like that, or value propositions, or fundraising offers, whatever you want to call it, in campaigns, where it's like $30 a month to sponsor a child, or a certain amount of money to provide a meal to someone in a community meals program. And I think, and maybe you see this with some of your customers and clients, which is that people will come back to me and say, well, I don't know if we can really break it down like that, or, I don't know if we can actually be that specific and tangible. And I always encourage people to really try to dig deep into that, because the more specific, tangible, deadline-driven your call to action or your fundraising offer can be, the more people are likely to respond to that, because they understand what they're giving to and what the impact of that will be.
Yeah, and we hear that a lot. And the response I love is when we're like, oh, you have to tell a story, and they're like, you don't understand, we're trying to fundraise for administrative support.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, well, A, if you sell it that way, no one's going to give to you.
Yeah.
And B, you have to tell a story behind why your administrative support actually matters. And it goes back to your mission, why your organization exists. And we just had a case of that where an organization that served women in the community, really their funding was just for them to be able to do the work. And so the funding was very much like, hey, give us money so that I can spend my time investing in serving women in a specific way in our community. And they were like, we just don't know how to translate that into a story. And so they were like, well, it cost us, $100,000 a year to operate, or something, probably a little bit more than that, but that was what was missing. I was like, how many women can you actually serve, or how many women would not be served if you didn't do your job?
Right. Yeah. That's always a great question to
ask.
That
helped implement the impact metric. And she was like, well, let's say, I don't remember the number, but let's say it was 200. It's like, okay, great. So for $100,000, you're impacting this many women in X, Y, and Z ways. There's your story, or at least the raw materials for you to begin building out your story. And it helped them actually translate their administrative funding need into a story and a campaign people could get behind.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think that's such a good example. I was trying to think of some that I've worked on over the years because almost, I think every campaign I've ever worked on with organizations, it's almost always for unrestricted funding, right?
Yeah.
Even if there's some sort of offer,
Yeah.
that is specific and tries to give people a clear idea of how, one example of how the donation might be used. And I think that question about like, what would happen if this service didn't exist, or what would happen if we didn't do this work, can often be so key to taking you from just focusing on the specific way you're going to spend that money to the impact of spending that money. And I think when you connect the dots and go a step further to the impact of how you spend that, that's where donors can get really excited, because they're able to understand, it's not about like overhead costs or something, but it's about this end impact, how they can influence, impact people in the community, contribute positively to, projects that are going on, things like that.
Yeah, and I think it's always selling success. And so I think like there's a famous quote that says, it was a drill maker, I believe, and they say, we don't sell drills, we sell 2-inch wide holes. So that what they want, what the customer actually wants is a hole, and the drill is what gets to the hole. And so that story is interesting because it's like, without the drill, you couldn't get to the hole. But if we tried to sell the drill, it doesn't resonate. But if it's like, hey, we're helping them accomplish this task, thus by the drill, you're kind of saying, okay, there's a problem that exists. Here we're providing you kind of a solution of what a plan looks like. Here's the call to action. Here's what success looks like if you take that action. And here's what failure looks like if you don't take those actions. Like if your office shuts down, your lights go off, and none of you show up for work tomorrow, why does that matter? Like that's a great starting point for finding a year-end fundraising campaign appeal and story.
Yeah, I love that. And I know you just mentioned an example of a campaign you were recently working on, but I'm curious, during last year's giving season, were there any campaigns or trends, things that you saw that were really exciting to you that you hope to kind of see more of this year?
Yeah, I think what I love is if you can take a broader story and actually contextualize it. And so I've seen this done really well in 3 different ways, and using 3 different mediums or types of stories. And so one is by taking a need, and there's an organization that we work with a lot that's called World Bicycle Relief. And basically they help mobilize people in developing communities, which actually enables them to live a better life and to serve their community more productively. But instead of going out and saying, hey, we raise money to provide bicycles to developing communities, X amount of dollars helps us fund a bike, they took it a step further and contextualized their campaign to a specific location in Zambia, and then told that community's story through video. Another organization, which is the organization I used to work with, did a year-end campaign on behalf of Syrian refugees in the work that they were doing to serve Syrian refugees. And instead of just, again, a general appeal for Syrian refugees, they contextualized it down to an individual person and told a story in a framework that said, I'm a Syrian refugee. So they personalized and humanized what that actually means so that their supporters could relate to it. It's like, well, I'm a father, there's a Syrian refugee as a father. How do I make that story? Or, I have kids and this mother. And so they represented their story in the way. So they took the story and then built a campaign around it called I'm a Syrian refugee, And then the one and so they created a personal narrative that was actually with real people and told their stories. The third example I thought about, which wasn't, I don't believe, a specific year-end campaign, but it was an annual campaign that the YMCA of North America did last year. That was called Zoe for President. And what they really did was, it was brilliant. So they were playing up the idea that we were going through election cycle and all those different things. And they basically took the creative liberties to basically create this character named Zoe and use her as kind of the banner story behind their campaign to really showcase that the YMCA supports a person from birth, Zoe, to president. And or whatever dreams they have. And so it wasn't that they took, in World Help's example, they took real people's stories and highlighted them so that they were relatable. In the YMCA's example, they took basically the complexity of what the YMCA does and repositioned it into one little girl's story that had a hook based on the presidential campaign appeal that said Zoe for president. And they helped explain why they exist and why you should support them through the eyes of this one little girl. And so all of those three examples, so you have location example, you have personal story example, and then you have creative narrative, are all great ways that are different that might be applicable for, those fundraisers out there trying to think through their year-end fundraising plan.
I love that. There's so many really interesting and creative things happening with storytelling these days. And for those of you who are listening in, if you're looking for other examples, one place that I often like to go to see some really great examples is Sophie.org, which is the showcase of fundraising, inspiration, and innovation. And they have a lot of really fantastic case studies that you can check out there and take a look at if you're looking for some other, appeal and campaign inspiration. So Noah and I are going to take some questions here in just a few minutes. So if you're tuning in and you have questions for us, feel free to send those in using either the chat box that's over on the right-hand side of the screen, or just below the video stream, there's also a button that says Ask a Question. You can submit there, which you're welcome to do.
I guess I don't know where I am on people's screens, but for me, the chat box is right there.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah, so maybe it's over there for you. I'm not sure. It's on the side of the screen. Yeah.
Feel free to send in your questions. We'll definitely answer those here in a minute. Before we do that, though, Noah, I just want to ask you one last question as we kind of wrap up, which, what are your sort of top 3 storytelling tips for nonprofits as they're starting to plan their year-end campaigns? What should we be thinking about? What should be really top of mind for all of us?
Yeah, I think it's more, the tips I have are more to address objections to storytelling. Okay. So the first one is, and I think we addressed this, is that you do have a story, no matter what your cause is or what your nonprofit does, is there are stories. I hear all the time fundraisers are like, I love the idea of storytelling, but we just don't have a story. And I'm like, then you shouldn't exist, And so I think the first tip I would say is you do have a story. You just have to find it. The second thing is fundraisers tend to say, I'm a fundraiser, I'm not a storyteller. And so the second tip is, no, you are a storyteller. The essence of fundraising is all about storytelling. You're presenting opportunities, you're defining that case, and then you're showcasing that. And you're trying to inspire people, you're trying to activate them, you're trying to rally them around your cause. That is storytelling in a nutshell, according to how we see it. And then the third is that there's some great, so then it's like, okay, well, how do I go about doing that? There's some great frameworks out there that are consistent and applicable for storytelling. One of them is the hero's journey, which is basically just talks about how you actually tell a narrative in a way that resonates. And the other that I love, and it's by Donald Miller, it's called the brand script. And so it's basically telling stories through the lens of, there is someone doing something, there's a problem, there's a plan that's in place, then there's a call to action. So a guide steps in and says, or there's a hero that's trying to accomplish something and do something. Yeah. And then there's an outcome that's success and an outcome that's failure, very similar to what I just mentioned a few minutes ago. And I think if you can basically paint that picture in a way that allows the people reading that to feel like they could be the hero in the story. Right. And so you want to leave the hero empty. Your organization is not the hero. That's not going to motivate anybody to get involved. And so as you tell stories, ensure that your donor is the hero, and paint that picture well. I think the fourth tip, which I didn't have written down and prepared, but I've just thought about it a lot lately, is typically I feel like in people that have been fundraising for a long time get this. I think people that are new to fundraising, like myself, who kind of grew up in digital, have lost sight of this, is that when you send an appeal or you send an email or you send a social media post or you send all those things, even though you're writing it and sending it out to a group of people, it's being consumed by one person at a time. And so if your messaging can make sure that it is it's designed to be consumed by one person, and you're not saying, hey, everybody, here's what we're doing, or hey, as a community, this is what we're doing, but they're reading that appeal or that email in a one-to-one context, you should write that way. And I think if you think well about that, you'll see a higher response because you're relating to people one-to-one rather than one-to-many. So even though you're writing one-to-one, one-to-many, it's being consumed one-to-one. And so being able to do that well and personalizing in that way, I think, is hugely impactful and something we've even seen in a business context that's worked really well for us.
I like that tip, and I'll just add a fifth one in to kind of round us off. So as you were talking about writing in a one-to-one context, it made me think about some of the work that we've been doing this summer with nonprofits, which a lot of it has been around audience research. We do a lot of work on donor surveys, constituent interviews, and focus groups, things like that. And the reason why I love doing that with organizations is because it actually gives you clear anecdotal data to start working on your messaging and to imagine who that one-to-one consumer or donor is of that information that you're going to be sending out to them. And working on things like that over the summer is such a great opportunity because it's going to set you up with some really current relevant data points as you move into year end to think about, what did I learn from people over the summer? What were they interested in? What part of our work really resonates with them? What is their relationship to our organization? There's just so many questions you can ask that can be really beneficial to help you really hone in on that a little bit more. So if you have time this summer still and you're thinking about other things you can do to prep for year end, I'd really encourage you to talk to some of your donors and start to collect more of that information about your audience that can be really helpful as you develop stories and messaging into year end fundraising.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I've seen one question here in the chat box. Michelle had asked if we could repeat the website that I had mentioned for story inspiration. I've typed it in the chat box for those of you who are listening. It's sofii.org, SOFII.org. It's the showcase of fundraising, inspiration, and innovation. And you'll find lots of examples and great case studies over there. Great. So I haven't seen any other questions, Noah. Maybe we just did a really excellent job explaining things.
That could be the case. We just communicated our story message so well that everyone's just
definitely hang out here for another minute or so. Folks have questions. Thanks, Michelle. We're glad we did.
Absolutely. Thank you, Michelle.
Maybe yes, we're waiting for any other questions. Noah, maybe you can just let people know what's a great way to get in touch with you if they have questions or would like to follow up.
So like I said, CauseVox is, we provide online fundraising tools, but we also, our mission is to help good things flourish. And we do that both through technology, but we also do that through our educational resources on our blog. We do webinars that I host on a weekly basis almost now. And so you can connect with us at causevox.com, and you can check out our resources section. There's resource guides, there's blogs, there's webinars, there's podcasts. We try to provide, we feel like our product solves like 5% of your problems. And my job on the marketing side is to solve for the other 95% of your problems that come up as a fundraiser on a daily basis through inspiration and tools and education and stats. So there's tons of resources there. In addition, more specifically, and if it's all right, we are hosting a webinar at the end of this month around year-end fundraising planning, and I'll share that link out if anyone's interested. We would love to have you. It's a free webinar similar to this, where we're just hanging out, sharing best practices.
Yeah, if you'd like to put that in the chat box, feel free to do that. I did see one other question here from Marianne. She had asked us if we had any other tips for figuring out, actually figuring out what your story is. And I think we talked about this a little bit. And Ariane, I'm pretty sure you mean like your organizational narrative and not just like a specific story about a person. I'm happy to answer that question first, Noah, if you're typing stuff in there.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think, for me, okay, yes, organizational narrative, definitely. When I work on projects like that with organizations, typically the first thing that I always like to do is kind of assess what has been sent out in the past. So actually taking a look at your communications over the past few months or maybe year, if you have that capacity, just to take a look and see, what have been the messages that we've been putting out there? What's the story that we've been telling over time? Because sometimes you work on individual pieces and the story that's happening there, but it's harder to kind of identify what that story might be over time. So it's useful to look at that just to see, how on target you might be or maybe off base you are. The other thing that I like to do, as I mentioned, was really around audience research. And the reason I like to do that is to kind of assess the organization's understanding of the story versus the audience's understanding of the story that you're putting out there. And if you can ask questions around sort of brand perception and story perception, that can be really helpful to figure out what people are saying about you, how they think about your organization. I'll give you a few examples. I've been working on an audience research project this summer with one of my clients, and a couple of the questions that we've been asking are, how would you describe this organization in one sentence? And then the other questions we've been asking are, what's one word that comes to mind when you think of them? And the reason I like to ask the question about one word that comes to mind is because that descriptive word that people associate with the organization tells me a lot about what they think about them and the brand and how they sort of interacted with them. And it can be a really great way for me to think about, how that ties into a larger narrative that we want to share. No, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think another thing, I think that's all of what you said is actually the approach to how to do it. And I think I've seen that play out where we assumed that people gave to our organization for a specific reason. We ran research studies and realized that it was for a different reason that we had cut 6 months ago, or wording and messaging on how we were describing that. So I've seen that play out in practice, and I think the work that you do with nonprofits is incredible and very insightful. I think the other thing for me that it might be a quick test to do is to go back and read the history of why your organization was founded. What was the story that caused your organization to exist? And that might help you identify where some of those initial elements or aspects of your organization, or if there was big shifts in your organization, why did those big shifts happen? What changed about the landscape, the cause? And again, it goes back to if you shut down, who would be impacted?
Right.
What wouldn't happen? So if you're an environmental organization, maybe, the environment goes to, anyways, it goes down and fails, or we don't have green space for families to celebrate. If national parks go away, fathers that grew up in the national park can't take their sons and daughters to the national park to experience that same thing.
Yeah.
So there's a story behind that. Or, if you take care, or if you help women in a local community, if you don't show up to work, those women aren't getting that help. They aren't being served. They're not being welcome. And there's a lot of other narratives there, but that's just a case. If you just shut down, what would change? Who would be impacted? Who would care? That might help illuminate some stories that you could play into.
Yeah, I think that's really great. We have one other question that I think we'll end with from Julia. And Julia asked, how do you use your media leading up to your year-end ask to build up to the ask without giving it away? I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I guess I don't understand fully the context, but I'll talk to just kind of campaign structuring in general, is that if you have it, if you're trying to, what we see a lot is we actually design a new methodology because we don't think the direct response methodology works anymore. And so we've developed something called people fundraising methodology. And if you're interested, feel free to email me. I'd be happy to show you. We're still in the development phases. But what it's all about is that your job is to inspire your community to get behind your cause, and then activate them, and then rally them around your cause. And so I think media is used to inspire. And so you can drip feed that out. You can share that out. But if you don't want to give away the ask, I guess my question would be is, if I inspire someone to what means, why wouldn't I want them to know the ask? So I feel like I answered that incorrectly because I don't fully understand the question. But I feel like the media you're doing is to inspire your community to take some sort of action.
Yeah. All right. Well, Julia says that makes sense. So maybe we answered it correctly.
She's just trying to help me out because she realizes I'm struggling.
I mean, I hear what you're saying. I think, Julia, when you think of year-end campaigns, or when I think of them anyways, one of the things I think about is it kind of being a crescendo, you're building up to this moment of maximum sort of buzz and exposure and excitement around December and whatever it is your organization is fundraising for, which I get and I understand that as kind of a tactic and a strategy. And if that's kind of the way you're going and something you've done before, thinking about kind of reverse engineering your communications and your cultivation with people leading up to that. So, what can you do to prepare people? Can you tell them about what you're doing without actually asking yet, kind of planting the seeds of the campaign that you're going to run? That's certainly something you can also think about too, as sort of the strategic timeline leading up to rolling out that campaign in November and December. Awesome. All right. Well, I think we'll go ahead and wrap up for today. No, I really appreciated you being here. This has been a great conversation. Just as we wrap up, any final thoughts or information you'd like to share with people?
No, I'm so grateful for the opportunity, and we learned so much from you. I know Rob spent some time with you, and just we're thankful for individuals like yourself that amplify the value of story and fundraising, because we think that's what it's really all about. So I'm grateful for this. And then those that are on this have already taken the first step, which is to prepare early and start thinking about this. So I would also express that you're already ahead of most people, and that's a great first step. And now it's just thinking through, how do you actually build a plan and be successful, and know that you are a storyteller.
Absolutely. Yes. Well, thank you so much for joining us here today. For those of you who are tuning in, if you are over on Facebook and you're not a part of the Storytelling Nonprofits community group over there, head over to Facebook and search for the Storytelling Nonprofit Lounge. We have a private closed Facebook group for folks who are in our online community, and you're most welcome to join in on conversations and interesting discussions we have about storytelling throughout the week. All right, everyone, have a great rest of the afternoon, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Yeah, thanks everyone. See ya. Thanks, Vanessa.
Bye.